Hi, welcome to the Dynamic Duel Podcast, a weekly show where we review superhero films and debate the superiority between Marvel and DC by comparing their characters in stat-based battle simulations. I'm Johnny DC.
And I'm his twin brother, Marvelous Joe.
And in this episode, we will be reviewing the animated film Superman Red Son. It was released digitally on February 25th, and it will be dropping on Blu-ray the day this episode launches. The film, of course, is an adaptation of a comic book miniseries that came out in 2003 that was written by Mark Millar, and I love that comic.
Yeah.
It's on DC Universe. I read it not too long ago. It was really good. The movie, not as good, almost as good. We'll get into it.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about it. Because I feel like it raised a lot of interesting points that most other superhero media doesn't.
Right.
So.
Before we get into the review, however, we're going to break down the news items from the past week regarding Marvel and DC films. We're going to be talking about Matt Reeves' reveal of the Batmobile in his upcoming Batman film. We're going to be talking about how the New Mutants is officially rated PG-13. And we're going to be talking about the first Justice League Dark Apokolips War trailer.
Yeah, finally, a little bit of news.
Yeah.
As always, we list our segment times in our episode description, so go ahead and check out our show notes to skip ahead to a topic that you want to hear about. If you're listening to us for the first time, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can get notifications on when new episodes come out, which is every Tuesday, by the way. If you're not a first-time listener and you're already subscribed, please don't forget to rate us and review us on whatever platform you're listening to us on, because it really helps Jonathan and I out in spreading the show out to a bigger audience. But with that out of the way,
quick, to the No Prize.
A No Prize is an award that Marvel used to give out up until the 90s to fans. Our version, the Dynamic Duel No Prize, is a digital award that we post on social media that Jonathan personally draws for those who we feel gave the best answer to our question of the week.
I have to say I was really happy with my Bishop drawing. I'm just putting that out there. It's probably like the best drawing I've ever done.
It was really good. Last week's question was, what's your favorite Marvel or DC mobile app? That was coming off the news of the upcoming Marvel game Future Revolution that was announced at C2E2. Got a few answers for this one, so let's go ahead and dive in. Our first honorable mention goes to listener Richard McGrew, who gave the answer of Disney Plus. You can't get much better than the Disney Plus app with all the content that's on there.
Unless you're DC Universe, which was the answer given by Miggy Madingian.
Both apps give you access to exclusive movies and TV shows from Marvel and DC. So yeah, those are the big content apps.
Bo Bermudez gave the answer of Marvel Future Fight, which I believe is from the same creators as Marvel Future Revolution.
Correct. Yeah, it's another dungeon crawler style game like Marvel Ultimate Alliance. It's been out for a while and has a huge following. The game looks like a lot of fun. Colby Henches, Aaron Alexander-Jones, and Carmen Rodriguez get honorable mention for their answer of Marvel Strike Force. Yeah, and that's the turn-based role-playing game where you assemble a team of like 3 to 5 heroes to go up against another team and you guys take turns punching each other in the face.
Yeah, DC has one like that. It's called DC Legends. I used to play that like all the time. Never got legendary status because you had to pay for it. But it was cool to see all the characters there. And actually, both Marvel Strike Force and DC Legends were the favorite apps of Inferno Bat 6.
CJ Craft and Calvin John Della Merced get honorable mention for their answer of Spider-Man Unlimited. Now, that was a game that was based on the style of the cartoon, but the gameplay is a lot like Temple Run, if you've ever played that, where basically you're a runner on rails, and you kind of switch lanes.
You know, there was a Batman v Superman Temple Run type game, but it sucked. It was horrible.
Yeah, this one seems much better the way they were describing it. Adam Spees said that he was a big fan of Marvel War of Heroes when that was out. That was about like 5 years ago, I think. And that was like a card-based game.
He also mentioned Contest of Champions.
Out of all the Marvel game apps, I think Contest of Champions was my favorite one that I ever played. I just really loved the fighting mechanics, and Adam Spees mentioned that too. Each fighter felt very different.
Well, Kieran Pomare gets honorable mention for his answer of Injustice 2, which also is a fighting game, and it's a pretty good one. NetherRealm Studios, the makers of Mortal Kombat, definitely know how to translate that game into mobile app form.
When are we going to get a Marvel vs. DC fighting game?
Right? Never.
And lastly, our final honorable mention goes to Sir Rob Thoplial for his answer of Marvel Super War, which I had never heard of, but apparently it's a new game that's similar to Future Fight. It's like another dungeon crawler, it looks like, but it's only available in select countries at the moment. And I tried looking for it on the Apple Store, and I don't know if it's available in the US. But it looks pretty fun. It looks a lot similar to Marvel Future Revolution, too. But in addition to Marvel Super War, he also gave the answer of Injustice Gods Among Us.
And that one's pretty old. That was based off of the first Injustice game. Injustice 2, I think, is a little bit better than that, but I still had a lot of fun playing Injustice Gods Among Us.
And they're both DC fighting games, right?
Right. But the winners of this week's No Prize are Sir Patrick Hindsight and Joshua Smith. Sir Patrick Hindsight gave the answer of Arena of Valor, which is a mobile multiplayer online battle arena game similar to League of Legends.
Yeah.
I had never played that before. I downloaded it. And I mean, you have to pay for the DC characters, but I saw videos of what they could do, and it looks so cool. You could be Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, or Joker. I died right away playing it, but it looks like I'll be playing this for a while.
Really?
So thank you, Sir Patrick Hindsight, for that.
Nice. I'm giving the No Prize this week to Joshua Smith for his answer of Marvel Unlimited, which is not a game, but rather a library of all of Marvel's comics leading up to the past 6 months.
Yeah, it's kind of like DC Universe, but not as good.
Oh, it's way better.
No, it's not.
It's $70 a year, but I get access to all of Marvel's comics digitally. So it's a huge help. I often pair that app with an app called Jarvis, and basically that just gives profiles on all of Marvel's heroes.
Oh, interesting.
And it gives their stats and everything. So with those two apps combined, I have everything I need when I'm doing my research for the dual episodes of this show.
Oh, you have 2 apps for that?
Yeah.
I have 1 app.
Whatever.
DC Universe.
Does DC Universe have character profiles?
Yeah, it has an encyclopedia.
Oh, interesting. So really, DC Universe is kind of like 3 apps in one, because I would need Marvel Unlimited, Jarvis, and Disney Plus to match what DC Universe has.
Yep. Sucks to be a Marvel fan.
It's fine.
Congrats once again to Sir Patrick Hindsight and Joshua Smith. You guys win this week's No Prize. If you, the listener, want to win your own No Prize, stay tuned to the rest of the episode where we'll ask another question of the week.
And now that that's done,
on to the news. So last Thursday, Matt Reeves, the director of the upcoming Batman film, released on his Twitter account images of the Batmobile that will be in his film. I just gotta say, like, Matt Reeves, you're the coolest guy ever.
Yeah, he's revealing all this stuff in a way that most other movie directors don't do.
Yeah, like James Gunn hasn't done anything like that. Like, the best looks we have of the Suicide Squad are from set photos.
Yeah, I think it's a practice that other superhero movie directors should take, because it instills confidence in the fan base.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, there's a lot of people who don't like this Batmobile. Initially, my first impression of it was, what is this, made for TV? And I'm kind of getting that vibe from a lot of the designs from this film. It looks like it's, you know, I don't want to say cheaply put together, but it looks like it's more easily put together than some of the previous designs we've seen of Batmobiles and Batsuits.
Yeah, especially when you compare it to the Tumbler from the Christopher Nolan trilogy or Ben Affleck's more concept car.
And I love the idea of the Batmobile as a concept car, something that like we've never seen before. This one looks like it's built off of a muscle car.
Yeah, like a Mustang.
With just a huge ass engine strapped to the back. Now the engine looks really cool. I can't wait to see that thing like revving up and shooting out fire. But for the rest of it, I guess it suits the design of what we've seen so far.
It's a little bit more down to earth.
Yeah, exactly.
Much like the Batsuit itself, which we talked about in a previous episode.
And I could see the appeal of that, because there's going to be a lot of people who see this and are like, I could make that. I could do that. I see a lot of fans of like the Fast and the Furious franchise, especially, saying that this car looks really dope. I've never been a car guy, and so I'm not exactly sure what car this is based off of, but it does resemble some of the older past Batmobile designs from the comics, like during Neil Adams' run. So I'm not too upset by it.
To me, it seems evocative of the 1960s Batman show, Batmobile.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and same with the cowl, which, by the way, is totally growing on me after seeing these images.
Yeah.
The cowl looks cool. The cape looks cool. It has a cool silhouette.
Yeah. Well, I mean, from a certain angle. Again, when you look at the cowl straight on, the bat ears look a little ridiculous, judging from the set photos that we discussed a few weeks ago.
I really like the atmosphere of these photos, though.
Yeah.
Like, especially the shot where we see both the car and Batman from behind. Just seeing Batman's, like, cape, like, billow out, and you can see the scallop on the edge of the cape. It's just really cool. It reminds me a lot of like the Narrows from the Batman Begins films. Just like the smoke and the sepia tones. These photos give me really high hopes for the film, like tonally. It's gritty, it's noir, it's dark. It looks like it's going to be great.
It seems like the vehicle is built more for speed than for muscle, compared to the previous 2 iterations of the live-action Batmobile that we've gotten.
I mean, the same could be said for the suit, I think, as well. You know, it doesn't look like it's too heavily armored. It looks much more functional. Like he can move really easily in it.
Yeah. And this Batmobile looks like it can move around a lot more easy than the Tumbler, which was always having to, like, you know, destroy Gotham City to get around.
Yeah. I think what strikes me the most about this is that it has a windshield. Like, when is the last time you saw a Batmobile with, like, a full windshield? I mean, like, on the Zack Snyder version and the Tumbler, they both had, like, these small, like, little slits that you could, like, barely see out of, I feel like.
No wonder he was always crashing into shit.
Exactly. I don't quite know how I'm going to feel seeing Batman in the Batmobile from the outside, because it doesn't even look like the windows are too tinted, so that might be kind of awkward.
He's going to be cruising.
Yeah, usually when you look at the Batmobile, like, you can't see Batman inside of it, right?
Right.
But this, I mean, we're totally going to be able to.
You're going to see him so frustrated in traffic, just honking his horn and shaking his fist out the window. It's going to be fantastic.
There's not too much more to say about this other than I'm actually looking forward to seeing, like, set videos of this in motion, you know, being used for stunts and stuff like that. Again, I really just want to see that engine fire up.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the design. I do prefer previous Batmobiles, but it's all subjective, and that brings us to our question of the week.
What is your most favorite live-action Batmobile, and why? Post your answer to our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or email us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com. We'll pick our favorite answer and draw that person a Dynamic Duel No Prize that we will post to social media.
In Marvel news, the MPAA has officially released the rating for the New Mutants movie that's coming out in about a month on April 3rd. The movie is going to be PG-13. Huge shock, right?
Kinda, yeah.
Well, for some people, because, you know, the movie is a horror film. And typically with horror films, you know, you get like grisly violence and disturbing images and stuff like that, which warrants an R rating. That being said, the reason this film got a PG-13 rating was for violent content, some disturbing and bloody images, some strong language, thematic elements, and suggestive material. So despite the fact that young teenagers can still see it, the movie still sounds pretty hardcore.
Yeah, I think they just finished post-production on the film like last week.
Yeah, director Josh Boone shared a pretty cool image on Twitter with him and his visual effects guys with an image of the demon bear in the background.
Or like a tease of it.
Yeah, it looks a lot similar to what we saw in the last trailer that we got.
Yeah.
Which is to say it's going to look pretty damn cool, I think, on screen.
So I imagine we're not going to get another trailer for this film.
Probably not. That would be my guess.
I mean, they're already doing TV spots, so I guess why would they?
Right. No, I'm pretty satisfied with this PG-13 rating, despite kind of hoping for an R rating along the likes of the Deadpool films and Logan. Fox Studios has certainly never shied away from an R-rated superhero film.
Of course, this isn't Fox anymore, though.
Well, it still is Fox, but Fox is now owned by Disney, who I think is less inclined to treat their properties like that. Deadpool being the exception, because rumors have stated that future Deadpool movies will still be rated R.
Yeah.
Would I have liked to have seen an R-rated New Mutants horror film? Yes. Do I think it's necessary? No.
New Mutants doesn't need to be rated R.
So while the rating doesn't get me excited, the reason for the rating actually does. And I think that's the big news here. I was expecting the violent content, but to see, you know, the phrase disturbing bloody images on there, just...
It's disturbing.
Yeah. In all, I'm really excited that this movie is actually coming out in just under a month now. The last trailer was really good. This news is really good. And I hope the film is actually good. Because it's still kind of a question mark, you know?
Yeah. So you know who's not afraid to make rated R films?
DC.
Warner Brothers Animation.
That's right. Yeah, the upcoming Justice League Dark Apokolips War movie is going to be rated R.
Which kind of makes sense because the first Justice League Dark animated film was rated R as well.
Uh-huh.
But I'm still confused as to why this is called Justice League Dark based on this trailer.
That's a good point. This preview came out last week, and it appeared to focus on not just Justice League Dark, but also the Justice League and Teen Titans, and the synopsis refers to Suicide Squad. So it's like a culmination of all the teams that have appeared in this phase of the DC animated universe.
Yeah, it really sounds, based off of the synopsis and the trailer, that this is going to be like DC's endgame.
With Constantine, Superman, Cyborg, Raven, and Robin looking like the main characters.
Yeah, for sure. The synopsis reads that culminating a 6-year animated journey that began with the release of Justice League War in 2014, Justice League Dark Apokolips War finds Earth decimated after intergalactic tyrant Darkseid has devastated the Justice League in a poorly executed war by the DC superheroes. Now the remaining bastions of good, the Justice League, Teen Titans, Suicide Squad, and assorted others must regroup, strategize, and take the war to Darkseid in order to save the planet and its surviving inhabitants. This is truly the war to end all wars, and only the victor will live to enjoy the spoils. I hope this movie is like 3 hours long, because that sounds like it's going to involve a lot.
Yeah, it starts off by saying that Earth has been devastated.
Yeah.
Which makes me think a lot about Endgame. I wonder if they're going to incorporate time travel or something into this story.
I mean, that would be pretty ballsy if they did. I don't think they would do that.
Yeah. How else do you fix a decimated planet?
I don't know. There's magic users on the team now.
Oh, that's true.
They could probably do it.
Yeah, anything's possible with magic.
So the trailer actually starts off with the MPAA rating, and it says that it's rated R for bloody violence, language, and some sexual references. So take that, New Mutants. We've got nudity.
Yeah, but it's animated nudity. It doesn't count.
That's true. The trailer itself is pretty choppy, and it's kind of hard to make out everything that's going on. And I imagine it's difficult when you're dealing with that many characters and you don't really want to give away the story for this, because it is really vague. We do get to see all of the characters team up, but we also see like a Superman with green eyes and a beard.
And a Lois Lane with a big-ass gun who's adept at firing it.
Yeah, and like a Shazam who's missing a leg and has like a scratch across his face.
So it seems like this movie will incorporate like alternate universe DC heroes within the story.
I don't think they're alternate universe.
No?
No. I think this is just post Darkseid's devastation of the planet.
Oh, okay.
Damian Wayne is not wearing the Robin costume anymore, and he's carrying like a kryptonite sword. You'd almost think that like Batman died in the first war, because you actually see him sitting on Metron's chair, just like getting electrocuted.
Yeah.
Maybe he becomes like the new Metron. You see a lot of Constantine in this, and he's talking with a lot of members of the Justice League Dark. You see him talking with Swamp Thing, who's saying essentially like humanity got what it deserved.
I wonder if Zatanna and Deadman are going to be in this. We did see Etrigan the Demon from the first Justice League Dark movie.
Yeah. Zatanna's definitely in it. We saw her like in this spaceship thing.
Uh-huh.
But it looks like the villains are also involved, because you see Lex Luthor, you see Black Manta, you see quite a few superpowered bad guys like teaming up with the heroes.
That's awesome.
That is really cool.
I always love it when they team up to fight a greater threat.
The cast list for this film is just unbelievably long. It goes on for like pages. They really got everyone back for this film. If only this were live action, man, it'd probably be better than Endgame.
Probably not. I mean, it's DC we're talking about, so it's automatically inferior. That being said, as good as this cast list is...
I'm not going to let you just say that without a rebuttal, okay?
All right.
First of all, you're wrong. Second of all, fuck you. Now continue.
Okay. Yeah, it makes you wonder if DC released this movie in response to Avengers Endgame. Because with the massive cast, with the devastated Earth, with the ultimate bad guy being this Titan of War...
I wouldn't be surprised if this was inspired by Endgame, as much as that hurts me to say. But I mean, we'll see. It could be completely different. The film comes out on May 5th digitally, and will be released on Blu-ray on May 19th. So it's not too far away.
Yeah, that's coming up pretty soon.
We're going to have to tie some kind of duel into it around that same time. Doesn't Black Widow also come out that same week?
Black Widow opens up May 1st, so it's within the same week.
Okay, yeah, so we'll be reviewing Justice League Dark afterwards. But I think that does it for all of the news this week. So let's get into our review of the animated film Superman Red Son. Okay, so Superman Red Son, again, is an animated film of a 3-part comic miniseries written by Mark Millar that came out in 2003. The miniseries was part of DC's Elseworlds imprint, which told stories using DC characters that didn't have to adhere to DC canon.
Right, like alternate universe type stuff.
Yeah, like Kingdom Come, Gotham by Gaslight, there's a lot of good Elseworlds stories out there. This miniseries won an Eisner Award, which is like the Oscar for comic books. And though I was aware of the comic and the praise it received when it came out in 2003, I only read the comic recently, and I have to say, it's one of my favorite DC comic storylines that I've ever read.
Well, I think it never appealed to either of us when it first came out because the concept just doesn't sound appealing, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. There's certain Elseworlds comic storylines that I just never really cared to read, and for some reason, this was one of them. But I should have, because it was really good. I had really high expectations going into this film, and while I can confidently say that the film was entertaining and thought-provoking, I was still disappointed with it. The film posits a lot of questions, but in itself, it isn't diligent enough, or perhaps it's wise enough to not provide answers or take a firm stance.
Now, were the questions raised by this movie, which has a lot to do with political ideologies, were those questions also raised by the comic book, and were they answered?
No, they were more so raised by the comic than the film. And no, it didn't answer those.
It didn't take a side?
No, not at all. I mean, the story was written in 2003 about the 1900s, and the political landscape has shifted a great deal since then. The film is not as profound as it could or maybe even wanted to be. It sits somewhere in the middle of fantasy, sci-fi, and political thriller, but it doesn't say much. It only just lays the barest foundation for interesting conversations.
Yeah, like namely the pros and cons of different systems of government. You have Superman here who's fighting for communism, and you have Lex Luthor who's fighting for democracy, and yet both of them end up being quite fascist in their approach.
Well, superheroes in general, I think, are more fascist than a lot of comic book fans are willing to admit. You know, when you impose your wills by force, that's fascism.
Right. And I think Superman here learns that the hard way. It's kind of a tragic tale.
Absolutely. As with most adaptations, however, the book was better. I was actually surprised with how much they changed for this film. That said, the majority of the story points were all there, and I'll be going into spoilers for both the book and the movie in this review, so if you haven't experienced either, I'd recommend you do that before continuing any further in this episode. The comic miniseries is a quick read. Again, it's only 3 issues, and it's available on the DC Universe, and the film isn't terribly long either. It's pretty close to 90 minutes. Again, it's on Blu-ray and digital now. So jumping right into the themes, I think the biggest appeal of the Red Sun story is its examination of nature versus nurture. Like, what if Superman's ship landed in the Soviet Union rather than Smallville, Kansas? What would the world be like? Would he still be Superman if he's not fighting for truth, justice, and the American way?
Yeah, in the comic books, you know, American Superman was raised on the ideals instilled by his parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent. In Red Sun, where the ship lands in Russia, we don't really get to see the farm family that adopts him. Instead, as a young boy, he's adopted by the Soviet state and raised on their ideals. Stalin even often refers to Superman as son throughout the course of this film.
Right.
So how do the ideals of government shape the behaviors and thoughts of individuals?
The nurture aspect.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, he's still a superpowered do-gooding champion of the people, all people for the most part. He's just loyal to Stalin. Honestly, I was kind of surprised when I saw Superman save the citizens of Metropolis from the Russian satellite. Like, I wasn't expecting the humanitarianism of a Stalin supporter to outweigh his nationalism. But as it turns out, Superman wasn't a nationalist.
Yeah, he was totally willing and eager to help out other nations, believing that despite the fact that their government held different ideals, the people themselves were still worth saving.
Exactly. And now that I think about it, actually, it's probably a good thing that he wasn't a nationalist, because a National Socialist is a Nazi.
Right.
You know, the word Nazi is actually a German abbreviation for National Socialism. If you're not familiar with what a nationalist is, it's someone who strongly identifies with their nation and supports its interests to the detriment of other nations. Superman wanted to help all people of all nations, not only by saving and helping them through the use of his superpowers, but by spreading socialism. And in that regard, this Superman was an imperialist, or someone who wants to extend his country's power and influence through force, if necessary.
Which does make him a dictator, yes.
Yeah.
But his approach seemed to be generally benevolent. Like, he sincerely believed he was making the world a better place. And this movie did a great job of showing the dangers of that. You can't instill your ideals on others through force.
Or fear. It's implied that many nations in this story bowed the knee out of fear, which makes sense because of the Russian propaganda we see at the beginning of the film showcasing Superman's powers.
Yeah.
It also makes sense because socialism itself is a hard sell. It's one of the reasons Stalin became an imperialist in real life, because the neighboring countries around Russia weren't implementing socialism on their own. You hear socialism talked about a lot lately, especially democratic socialism, and it's a touchy subject. We actively try to avoid politics on this podcast, but the socialism versus capitalism debate is one of the central conflicts of this film. I want all of our listeners to know that my understanding of history and economic systems, like socialism and capitalism, are elementary at best.
We're dummies.
We're talking about these topics in regards to a fantasy story, so there's no need to add us with your political opinions. Now, I would say this story, particularly the comic, is mostly pro-capitalism, but it's balanced in a way that makes you understand why someone like Superman would subscribe to and promote socialism, which is ironic, because his very existence upturns the socialist ideal that all men are created equal.
That's very true, yeah. And, the idea of socialism at its core is based on equality.
Right. If you're not familiar with what socialism is, it started as a philosophy to eliminate the economic and social gap between the working class and the rich that had developed in Europe through capitalism. Society is driven by need, and things like food, clothing, etc. are produced to provide for those needs. But when the rich control the means of production, it allows them to benefit off of the work of their employees and can lead to an abuse of their authority. Socialism is an economic model in which the government takes control of the means of production, essentially turning its citizens into government employees. And it distributes goods equally among all of the people in an effort to, again, eliminate the social gap between the rich and the poor.
Yeah, the big downside of socialism is corruption, right? If you have a corrupt government, the benefits of socialism go out the window. The downside of capitalism, of course, is inequality.
Exactly, and enforcers of socialism claim the moral stance that things should be equal because everyone is equal, and the only way to achieve a utopia is to have everyone's needs met equally. But someone like Superman is not equal to everyone else. He's a Superman. This version, thankfully, maintains the humility that the character is famous for. So he doesn't think of himself as better than anyone, and because he's so capable, he's actually able to provide for the needs of most of the world. So where socialism has historically failed, like you mentioned, in the real world, due to dictators' greed and the inability of the people to produce enough to satisfy their own needs, in this story, because someone like Superman is both the dictator and a worker, socialism works.
Yeah, so in that regard, I thought this movie felt very pro-socialist at times, which was surprising given the current political climate. And you said that the movie kind of veers a little bit more pro-capitalist, though, and I really think that's because the movie never really goes into the downfalls of capitalism. We see Lex Luthor pretty much get away with being a provocateur scot-free. He goes and retires and lives happily ever after at the end of this film.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Which I think is a big mistake of the movie. It seemed like America was going to take advantage of the opportunity of the fall of the Soviet Union to spread democracy throughout the world, but we never see Lex Luthor learn the same lesson that Superman did, even though he needed to.
Right. And in the comic, it didn't touch on the downfalls of socialism, really, the way it did in the movie.
Oh, really?
That's one of the big differences between the movie and the comic.
Interesting.
Like, in the comic, you still had the dissenters and the terrorists like Batman, but they didn't touch on the gulags or anything like that.
Oh.
Yeah. While socialism is an attractive idea in that it has everyone's needs met equally, it often comes at the cost of freedom. There's a pretty famous quote from a Nobel Prize-winning author and Soviet Union Gulag survivor, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, that if everyone is equal, they are not free. And if everyone is free, they are not equal.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah. There will always be people who want more and better for themselves and their family than the minimum, and they'll work harder or have the talent to justify it. It's like Jor-El's quote from The Man of Steel. What if a child dreamed of becoming something other than what society had intended? What if a child aspired to something greater? In this film, that child would be represented by Lex Luthor, who is sort of the embodiment of capitalism and comes across as way more villainous in the comic.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It makes sense because capitalism isn't perfect. By its nature, it's cruel and apathetic and essentially Darwinism, survival of the fittest.
Uh-huh.
And that's exactly the kind of person Lex Luthor should be. Like, we Americans like the idea that all men are created equal, and we strive to provide equal opportunity. But like a game of Monopoly, if someone is strategic or lucky enough, the tides will turn pretty fast. Capitalism doesn't care about unskilled workers. It only cares about competence and talent and money. And Lex Luthor is as talented and rich as they come. He's his own Superman, in a way, the finest humanity has to offer, who is threatened by the foreign competition that Superman poses. And capitalism is all about competition. If you need a definition for capitalism, it's America's economic model, where industry is controlled by private owners for profit. Where a socialist nation promises to provide for its people, a capitalist country asks not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Capitalism evolved out of feudalism, where people worked for landowners like kings and lords in exchange for goods and living arrangements, though you had to be willing to fight and die for the lord you lived under. It was essentially slavery. When people colonized America, most owned their own land, so feudalism died. Most world economies are now capitalist, but like anything, it's all an experiment. Capitalism is constantly evolving, kind of like Lex Luthor's plot to defeat Superman. Framing the conflict between Superman and Lex Luthor as opposing economic ideologies was just a brilliant move on behalf of Mark Miller, and in a way, it made the characters feel more, dare I say, relevant than they have in a long time.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because usually in American comic books, superheroes have fought on behalf of America and its interests.
Right.
And the bad guys in comics have usually been Nazis or communists, especially going back to World War II and the Cold War. And the origins of comics really were kind of propaganda.
Yeah.
But we never viewed the conflicts of superheroes and supervillains as warring economic ideologies. It was always Captain America punching Hitler. It wasn't capitalism punching socialism.
Yeah, and we've never seen it from other countries' point of views either.
Which is kind of what this provides.
Exactly.
You have socialism punching capitalism, yet socialism is the protagonist.
But I also wouldn't say that Superman is a clear-cut good guy in this film. Like, there are no clear-cut good or bad guys.
No, everything's shades of gray.
Which is fascinating. I love stories like that. And it's so rare that you see a story like that involving Superman. Let's talk a little bit more about him and the character breakdown. So, Superman is voiced by Jason Isaacs, whose most famous role is probably Lucius Malfoy in the Harry Potter films.
I loved his performance in this movie.
Yeah, totally.
It was incredible.
It was kind of jarring to hear Superman speak in a Russian accent at first, but his accent is on point throughout the entire film.
Yeah, I kept waiting for it to be corny, but it never was.
No. I'm glad they went with an actor as talented as Jason Isaacs instead of forcing like Jerry O'Connell to do the Russian accent.
Yeah.
Like Jason Isaacs has a colder, more commanding voice, I think, that was necessary for this version of Superman.
Yeah, but he could also get like the compassion and concern through his voice when he needed to.
Yeah. I noticed that all of the major characters in this film share one common trait, and especially in the comic. They all suffer from obsession. Like, Superman's obsession is to create a utopia, not by force, but by winning the argument of the socialism versus capitalism debate.
Except, he kind of does use force in that people who disagree with him get technological implants that essentially turn them into cyborg slaves.
Superman robots.
At that point, he should have fucking figured that he was not doing the right thing. Like, why did he think it would be okay to turn people into robo-slaves? He should have known he was the bad guy.
Yeah.
And for the last half of this movie, he kind of played the victim card a lot.
Yeah, kind of like, no one wants to listen to me.
And be socialist.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and he had people, like, arguing with him that he was being a dick, but he just couldn't see why.
No, he was too entrenched in his ideology.
Yeah, that's always a dangerous thing.
Absolutely. It's never a good idea when you don't even try to attempt to see the other side.
Exactly. I think Chris Rock said it best in the movie Dogma, where he said, sometimes it's better to have ideas than beliefs, because ideas can be changed. And Superman's ideology was really a belief system.
Right. I mean, the character of Superman is somewhat successful in his mission in this film. It was really only the United States that refused to fall under his rule. And again, the Superman robots, if you're not familiar, Superman has often used robots in the comics that look like him. They're called Superman robots. They protect the Fortress of Solitude or help maintain his secret identity as Clark Kent when people start to catch on. Again, in this story, Superman robots are government dissenters that have been lobotomized and surgically implanted with cybernetics that program them to be loyal to the Soviet Union. It takes away their free will. And it's really horrifying, that whole concept. And it shows how far Superman was willing to go to maintain order and achieve his utopia.
Yeah, he was no better than Stalin, and yet he claimed to be. He's like, the state that these people are in is better than the gulags that they were in under Stalin's rule.
Right. But Batman certainly didn't think so.
Oh, no. Batman was crazy in this movie, though.
Yeah. One thing that kind of irked me about Superman's portrayal in this film was that he was also willing to kill to achieve his vision.
Yeah.
He killed Stalin, like, pretty brutally. And that's a divergence from the comics, where Superman was loyal to Stalin all the way to Stalin's death by cyanide. I really like the comic version better because it allowed Superman to maintain his no-killing stance from the main comics. And that was one of my favorite things from the Red Son miniseries. It was just how similar Superman was to what I'm familiar with, save for the Superman robots. And I have to say, this film completely botched the ending from the comic. It was what I was looking forward to the most watching this film, and when they changed it, it almost made me want to write the film off completely. Let's talk about Lex Luthor.
Okay.
So Lex Luthor was voiced by Dietrich Bader, who's a pretty well-known comedian and actor. He does the voice of Batman in the Harley Quinn animated series right now.
Yeah, and that was jarring to hear Batman's voice come out of Lex Luthor's mouth.
Yeah. Or the guy from Office Space.
Yeah.
Lex Luthor's obsession in this story was to prove himself better or more capable than Superman. And he's also, surprisingly, successful in this film, at the very end at least.
Yeah, I think he deserved some comeuppance that he never received.
Yeah, Lex himself, again, was also way more villainous in the comic than he is in this film. Like, Lois didn't love him in the comic. He basically ended their marriage so that he could devote himself entirely to defeating Superman. He came across as less threatening in the film, too. Like, in the comic, Lex broke into the Fortress of Solitude that was in Siberia, and before he could talk for very long, Brainiac pulled him away and imprisoned him, saying that Lex was a level 9 intellect that could convince Superman to commit suicide within 14 minutes if he wanted.
What? Dang.
Yeah, and like Lex also murdered his entire staff at Star Labs to prevent anyone from learning that the Bizarro clone beat him in chess. It's like that's not in the movie, and I'm not sure why.
It may be because the studio was trying to prevent the face of capitalism from being portrayed in too negative a light. It may have been a political decision.
I had that same idea, and it just makes me feel dirty.
Yeah, especially considering the fact that Lex gets to retire on like a private island with Lois at the end of this.
Yeah, that did not happen in the comic. Like, he wasn't all sweet to her at the end.
So weird.
But like, also, like in this film, you see Lex create Bizarro to combat Superman. But in the comic, Lex was also responsible for creating Parasite, Doomsday, Metallo, Livewire, like all the classic Superman villains.
Jeez.
Yeah, and it was Lex who first contacted Brainiac to invade. And it was him who realized the Green Lantern ring was a weapon. He also had Lois convince the Amazons to join his fight against Superman. This version of Lex Luthor, again, is like probably my most favorite version of the character that I've ever read. And he was great in this movie. Just, it was disappointing to see the translation from the comic to the film. Moving on to Lois Luthor, aka Lois Lane. She was voiced by Amy Acker, and I thought she did a great job here. The entire voice cast did a great job.
An amazing job.
Amy Acker brought all of the intelligence and sass and heart to Lois that's necessary to pull off that character. She didn't feature as heavily in this film as she did in the comic, which is not surprising considering the running time. Like in the comic, Lois and Superman had a mutual unspoken attraction for each other, but it never evolved beyond that. Lois was too obsessed with managing the Daily Planet to worry much about Superman's affection.
Yeah, in this movie, they didn't seem to be attracted to each other at all.
Right. Lois does play one major role in the film when she informs Superman about Stalin's mass killings in Gulag prison camps. Again, it's one of the few improvements the movie made over the comic, because again, the Gulag scene wasn't in the comic at all. The comic never touched on any of Stalin's crimes against humanity, surprisingly.
What? Really?
Yeah.
That's weird.
Super weird. I assume like they were still happening, but Superman, having been raised by the Soviet Union, was, I guess, okay with everything that had happened. Just as sort of like how Stalin describes it in this film, a terrible necessity.
I don't know how I feel about that.
It's a pretty big oversight, I think. Moving on to Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is voiced by Vanessa Marshall, a voice actress who's done Wonder Woman's voice before in other DC animation. Wonder Woman in this film is obsessed with bringing peace to the world of man. She's Superman ally in the comic as well, though in the comic she was actually in love with Superman, and that's why she helped him. He never caught on, though. I was kind of surprised when the filmmakers turned her into both a man-hater and a lesbian, considering her affection towards Superman in the comic. Though it really shouldn't be surprising, considering the origin of Wonder Woman, growing up in an actual utopia devoid of men. It makes sense for her character.
Yeah, they went a little bit heavy on the man-hating there. So to me, she kind of seemed like a bigot.
Yeah.
But you're right, they are able to rationalize it given her background.
Her lasso in the film was called the Lasso of Truth, but it was never actually called that in the comic. It was actually described as a lasso of domination that allowed her to control others, which is kind of fitting if she's on the side of the Soviets.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why she's like so helpless when Batman ties her up with it. It was kind of a clever spin on the whole like bondage fetishism that surrounded the character when she was first introduced in the comics.
Yeah.
How like binding her made her helpless.
It was her weakness.
Exactly.
Did you find it strange how Wonder Woman was able to destroy her lasso in the film?
I mean, it was definitely surprising. It was surprising in the comic as well when she was able to do it. It was like, holy crap.
I mean, that's supposed to be unbreakable.
Yeah. Lois actually convinced Wonder Woman to join Luthor's side in the comic, and she and her Amazons fought against Superman in the end battle alongside the Green Lanterns. But I think the movie's ending for the character was probably much better for the character. And I thought it was kind of clever how Superman's rejection of her kind of led to Paradise Island being hidden and invisible from men.
Yeah, that was a cool origin for that.
The last character I want to touch on is actually Batman. And he was probably my least favorite adapted character.
Yeah, when he killed all those people, I was like, this is not Batman. No iteration of this character, no matter what universe you're from, will a righteous Batman ever kill so many civilians.
Yeah. In the film version, he was like much more of an apathetic terrorist than he was in the comic. He didn't kill in the comic. Oh. So I was really, really confused by the whole, like, you have 10 minutes to exit the museum. Boom. 10 seconds thing.
So he didn't do that in the comic. Why did they do that in the film?
Exactly. I was wondering the same thing when I was watching it. I was like, he waited for all the people to exit before he blew it up.
He kind of reminded me of the character V from V for Vendetta, and how he was like a freedom fighter.
But even then, V wasn't killing innocents.
Yeah.
Batman killing innocent people in this film that he had no reason to kill, it made zero sense to me. It actually made me kind of upset when I saw it. Because that wasn't the only thing they changed about the character. Like in the comic, his parents were shot for printing anti-Superman propaganda. Again, the Gulag scene didn't exist, so he wasn't in it.
And that's a better rationale for why he would hate Superman, as opposed to, just blaming Superman for not saving them earlier, even though Superman did save him from the Gulag.
Yeah, you'd think that as much as he was resentful that his parents died while imprisoned in the Gulag, that Superman would actually be a savior figure for him since Superman released all of the prisoners.
Makes no sense. I hated Batman in this movie.
It's horrible. I need to save this for the end of the year awards for like the worst adapted character or something.
Yeah. The filmmakers made horrible choices with the character. And I couldn't empathize with the character when he was trying to tell Superman that he was a dictator and Batman and his people were going to make Russia a better place. I did not believe it for a minute.
No, because you saw what he had done to the people. He obviously doesn't care about them.
Exactly.
Batman died in the same way in the comic. He blew himself up rather than get captured and become a Superman robot. But that action in itself inspires like a whole rebellion of people who dress up like Batman. And it's actually the Batman who restore order to the Soviet Union once Superman dies at the end of the comic.
Oh, interesting. They should have shown that in the movie.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
The book was better. Let's get into the story highlights. The film starts off with young Superman's childhood friend Svetlana convincing him to use his burgeoning powers for the good of the Soviet Union. Flash forward several decades, and Russia reveals to the world that they have a Superman who fights for Stalin, socialism, and the international expansion of the Warsaw Pact. President Eisenhower tasks Lex Luthor with developing a countermeasure against Superman, so Lex hacks a Russian satellite to fall on Metropolis. Superman stops the satellite, saving the American city. Lois reveals documentation to Superman of Stalin's gulag and prison camps and mass executions. Superman frees the Gulag prisoners and kills Stalin, which again threw me off. But I guess if Superman is going to kill, I guess Stalin isn't the worst choice for a victim. Sort of like Hitler.
It was kind of badass how he did it. Like, they really used the heat vision well in this movie. From the point where, he kills Stalin to when the red lamps go dark on him in his fight against Batman to when he uses it against the Green Lanterns. I really liked the heat vision in this movie.
Yeah, Stalin just pretty much like exploded from the heat vision. It was kind of crazy. After that, Superman took control of the Soviet Union. With the help of Wonder Woman, Superman begins bringing other nations under Soviet control, and Lex creates a Superman clone dubbed the Superior Man that he overloads with energy, causing it to explode in its fight with Superman.
I was trying for the longest time to figure out who Superior Man was. Like, I wasn't sure if they were going to make him like Nathaniel Adam, like Captain Adam or something like that, or if he was indeed Bizarro. He didn't seem like Bizarro in his appearance or anything like that, but once they started overloading him with energy and he became grotesque, I was like, oh, okay, so this is supposed to be Bizarro.
Yeah.
Because his speech pattern started changing and everything.
Right. And in the comic, he always looked like that, strangely enough.
Oh, really? Yeah, the fight between Superman and Bizarro was the best action scene in the entire movie, I think.
I agree.
Overall, the movie was slightly lacking in action, like it only had like 3 main pieces, but that's just in terms of quantity. I think in terms of quality, all the action scenes were great.
Bizarro was definitely the challenger that put up the best fight.
Mm-hmm.
Superman just kind of plowed through like the Green Lanterns and Batman once he got his powers back.
Yeah. It's amazing at how many acts of war Lex Luthor committed against Superman, though. That really went unresponded.
Well, I mean, the United States still had nuclear weapons.
Oh, okay.
So going to war with them was essentially going to still end the world.
Gotcha. Did they ever address in the comic the fact that Russia also had nuclear weapons?
They addressed the fact that Russia really didn't need them anymore once they had Superman.
Oh, okay.
Later in the film, Superman stops the alien robot Brainiac from destroying the planet, but not before Brainiac shrunk the city of Stalingrad and encased it in a bottle. Superman reprograms Brainiac into becoming his advisor and surveyor of the Soviet Union.
Why was this version of Superman able to reprogram Brainiac? Although, I guess he really didn't. Yeah.
That same thing happened in the comic where Brainiac was like, surprise, not really reprogrammed. I just wanted you to do my dirty work for me. Which I thought was kind of a silly twist in the comic.
Huh.
Really, I think it was just a way to unite both Superman and Lex Luthor against a common enemy. Batman emerges and begins blowing up government buildings. He eventually kidnaps Wonder Woman, forcing Superman to confront him. Batman almost defeats Superman using red solar lamps, but Wonder Woman helps save Superman, and Batman martyrs himself for the cause of the rebellion. Lex becomes president and ushers the United States into a new age of unprecedented prosperity. He helps develop a new branch of the US military, the Green Lantern Corps, tasking them with taking down Superman.
Right, because under the Kennedy administration, the US government found the downed Green Lantern ship and were able to harness the energy of the ring.
Right, in the comic it was Abin Sur, but it didn't look like Abin Sur in this film.
No, not at all.
And it's like, why not? The Lanterns, led by Hal Jordan, head for Russia, but are intercepted by Superman over the ocean. Wonder Woman tries to intervene, promoting peace, but Superman rejects her, and she pledges to henceforth hide Themyscira from the outside world. Superman defeats the rest of the Lanterns and heads for the White House. The First Lady, Lois Luthor, meets him with the bottled city of Stalingrad, and Superman realizes that he, as an alien outsider, never had the right to take control over the world. Brainiac reveals that it had been manipulating Superman into taking over the planet and fights back. Lex shows up in an armored suit and helps Superman defeat Brainiac. In the comic, Lex never wore the armored suit. No. He was still in the Fortress of Solitude, hacking Brainiac from within that headquarters. He was intentionally captured.
Interesting. Well, I mean, it's better visually to have him in the armored suit.
Yeah, it's more heroic. At Brainiac's defeat, his self-destruct protocol engages, forcing Superman to fly beyond the solar system to prevent its destruction, sacrificing himself in Brainiac's explosion. It's revealed that Lex Luthor thought up all of the events of the film leading up to Superman's death. Because Superman is now gone, Lex steps down as president and charges Vice President Jimmy Olsen with uniting the planet. Superman, hidden in a Clark Kent disguise, is shown to have survived the explosion and now walks among mankind. The comic goes on for a while, but that's where the film ends. So all in all, the film, I think, is a great idea for a story. It's not as good as the book, but it's still thought-provoking.
It's definitely more thought-provoking than I initially thought it was, because when the movie ended, I remember thinking, okay, so what was the point of all that? To show that ideals shouldn't be forced upon others?
Knew that.
Okay, cool story, bro. But I think when you look into it more deeply, as you have, and really see the ironies of an unequal man promoting equality, it becomes a lot more interesting. I do wish it had more action. I do wish it wouldn't have made some of the choices that it did make, especially in regards to Lex Luthor and Batman and Wonder Woman. And I do wish that it was a little bit more fun, I guess, a little bit more entertaining.
I don't know about that. I honestly think that this film could have been like the Logan or like the Joker of Superman stories.
But I think all things considered, with this animated movie, I would give it about 4 stars.
Right. That's exactly what I'm giving it as well. 4 stars. It has some questionable choices, but all in all, I think it's one of the more compelling DC animated films. That does it for this review. If you guys have seen the film, let us know what you thought of it by reaching out to us on our social media, on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, or you can email us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys. We'd also love if you visit our website at dynamicduel.com, because on the site, you can do a lot of cool things like listen to episodes of this podcast. You can check out all the bonus material we have set up for our patrons and the merchandise that we have for sale. We have a lot of cool things for you guys to check out. Now, every week we release a new item based on Jonathan's artwork. Who are you drawing this week, Jonathan?
This week I'm drawing Hourman. It's tying into our previous Hourman versus Bishop episode. Has nothing to do with Superman Red Son. But next week I'll be drawing Lex Luthor, because we will be doing a Lex Luthor versus Baron Zemo duel episode.
Yeah, that's going to be a whole hell of a lot of fun.
Or maybe I'm doing Baron Zemo. One of those two.
Yeah. That does it for this episode, guys. Please don't forget to share our show with your friends and family and rate us or review us on whatever platform you're listening to us on, if that platform allows for ratings. It really helps us out on each of the individual platforms and other people discovering this show. And it means a lot personally to Jonathan and myself.
It absolutely does. Please don't forget to subscribe to the show if you haven't already. A special thanks to our executive producers, John Spees and Bodo Winter.
And we'll talk to you guys next week.
Up, and away.
True believers.